And there he is. It's Joe K, and he is bored silly.
Yes.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good. It's good to have you here.
Thank
It's
you.
amazing. You reminded me that the last time we talked was January of 2020 when we did the episode about you starting your group, the Only Requirement group in Chatham, and how much the world has changed since that time.
Yeah, I can't believe we had done that podcast and it was just about how, it was starting the group and then like 2 months later, like, oh, that group, everything's on hold,
Yeah.
and everything's changing
Oh,
and
that's
everyone,
right. A few
yeah,
months right after that.
yeah.
Isn't that
'Cause
crazy?
I remember it was like March 13th. I was out like with a friend of mine and then like, here in New Jersey, we got the notice like, like everything's like shutting down.
Yep.
And we were at like our favorite restaurant. It was like it's a friend of mine who's also in AA, and that was like our every Friday lunch. And it's like no, like this is like the biggest part of our recovery together. And that restaurant has since opened, so we can continue that.
Okay. Well, it's
But
funny, at work the other day, yesterday, I guess, we were talking, and I asked them, I said, when we left the office back in March of 2020, did we know we were going to be out for so long? And they
yeah,
said, no, we thought we was going to be out for like 2 weeks. And here we are still working from home, like almost 2 years later. But anyway, um, so for those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you've never been to this YouTube channel before, I am John, and this is Beyond Belief Sobriety. This is a podcast where we discuss topics of interest to people who are pursuing a secular path to recovery from addictions of all sorts and all kinds. And so we do live streams on every Friday. We put videos out here on our YouTube channel, and then we have an audio podcast where you can download wherever you like to get your podcasts. And I'm chatting here with Joe K, and he is from Chatham, New Jersey. And he and I have talked before in a previous podcast back some time ago. And he said, it's been a while since I talked to you, and I just had a lot on my mind, and some of the things that he told me that were on his mind are on my mind too. Though I've been feeling that way, and I was kind of thinking about all of this before we started today, and I thought, Joe is either bored, like I'm bored, or he's going through some sort of change, like I'm going through some sort of change about the way I'm thinking about my recovery and the program and my relationship to AA, etc. Or maybe it's just all this COVID shit has got me burned out. I don't know, but there's a lot to talk about. So, Joe, where do we start?
yeah. I was trying to wondering like where to start because I was like part of it's like boredom, but like you can only talk about boredom for so long
I know
without it becoming
that would put everybody to sleep.
yeah, and then but like dovetailed into that, I was kind of thinking about like the steps, and they're not really part of my recovery. And
No.
I mean, I did them with a sponsor and everything just to kind of do it, and it felt like a kind of like a checklist. I just
Yeah.
wanted to be able to kind of weigh in on it and experience it. But as I had thought about it, I guess I was about to read. I think it's Jeffrey Munn
Yeah.
staying sober without God as the 12 steps. I was reading like all these like 12 steps things. I'm like,
Hmm.
but I feel like I'm trying to shoehorn myself into a narrative that doesn't fit me.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
hear you. I hear you. I've evolved quite a bit on that, So, my background was traditional AA for like 25 years. I read the damn big book over and over repeatedly, and worked the steps with a sponsor, and just always thought the steps were, what I'm supposed to do. And I still find some value in them, but the way I think about them has changed dramatically. I mean, I'm a take it or leave it kind of a guy when it comes to the steps. And I'm also, I think they should come with a warning label that these are not going to fix you.
Yeah.
So don't think that they are.
Yeah.
They're not magic.
I think one of my frustrations is like it's like even I found in the secular meetings, there's just like you need to do the steps, or
Yeah,
you're lesser if you don't do the steps.
right.
And I think the message should be out there. Well, if the steps don't work for you, and there's another way of working for you, like that's okay too.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite meetings is the Perry Street workshop in the city. And in fact, I kind of
Hmm.
right after COVID started, I wasn't going to meetings, and one of my friends, whose name is Chuck, we actually we co-chaired a meeting at our home group. I'm like, oh, can't we be like Joe and Charlie? He's like, no, we cannot, because he's Chuck. And anyways,
Gotcha.
yeah, and I didn't really want to do. I was doing meetings, but I was like, I would not do the video. And one of the things about the video is I used to work from home when I worked in corporate America, and
Yep.
I really don't like. I wanted to separate everything I like, or I wanted everything. Home is like where is my sanctuary, and
Mm,
AA is somewhere I go to for a sanctuary. Hiking I like to do in my free time. That's a sanctuary, and home is just like me, my wife, and our two cats. And but I'm like, well, if I'm gonna like, he asked me to do a speaking thing, so if I'm gonna speak, I might as well be on the. If I'm gonna see everybody, I might as well see people too. So I kind of got over my Zoom phobia, so you will,
right.
so to say. And but they have a sign there in the meeting room that says there is no wrong or right way to recover. A little tongue tied. No wrong or right way to recovery. And
Hmm,
in the book, big book, it says that these are suggestions. It's like codified into law that you have to do the steps, and it just
right.
feels like it is. And I think I hit that Zoom wall. Like I just felt it's even more alienating. Like, and if a connection is the opposite of addiction, which I
Mm,
have that in my notebooks, like every other, that quote keeps popping up.
mhm,
And but at home, it's like you're just this little guy in a Brady Bunch box,
right.
and um,
Well,
and
when you talk going back to the steps, so I agree with you. I think that there is kind of within the culture of AA and probably all 12-step programs, NA or anything else where they use the steps. I think it's probably kind of it's kind of built in this mindset that um, this is something I need to do, and when I do it, I'm a good member of this 12-step fellowship, and blah blah blah. It's I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thing, but and people feel like they have to work them like there's like some sort of a process like you have to actually go through and kind of work through them, and I guess some of them you do, there are some things that you do, but when you really step back from them for a little bit and you look at them in context of the book where they were written, all they are all it is a description of somebody's experience, and it wasn't my experience or your experience or anybody's experience who's alive today, but it was the experience of a certain group of people who existed back in Akron and New York in the 1930s, right? And they described that experience based upon what they were living at the time to that Oxford group and so forth. But that's all it was a description of their experience. He just happened to put it in a list, and that's it. But so I have totally relaxed on the steps in that I think that if you really stop and think about it, a lot of what happens in that are written down in those steps when you take all the God stuff out are things that you would probably normally do anyway when you are stopping an addiction and beginning to change. Okay? So it's like this is just my opinion, but I think it was almost just natural for me. Once I got to the point where I realized I needed to stop drinking, that it was a problem. Once I got to that point, it was almost natural for me to kind of reflect on what the hell had been going on in my life all this time, you know? So I was already kind of getting to that point where I was kind of getting some self-honesty and some self-reflection. And then I think it was also natural for me to want to realize what an asshole I had been, for those years, and to want to go and set things right and at least get along with the people that are closest to me. So I think that a lot of the stuff that just kind of would happen naturally anyway. And those guys back then, they just wrote it down in a list of 12 and they happened to put God stuff all over it because they thought that that's where it was coming from. Just my opinion.
yeah, I would agree. Also, too, when you talk about the narrative, the book, that's not my narrative. I remember going, I
Right.
was talking to my sponsor, and they talk about the part where you're padding your expense account. He's like, "Well, didn't you ever do that?" I'm like,
No.
"No." I'm like, "God, no. Like, I'd be fired." Yeah, I don't think it was my
Right. I
job.
know.
He's like, "But it's in the book." I'm like, "It may be in the book, but it's not black and white. Like, just because it's in the book doesn't mean it happened. That's one person's experience."
Right.
And I mean, I like my sponsor. I mean, he's very open minded. It's funny because he's a very religious guy, but he's like, "You asked so many questions," but he's like, "I like it. I like talking about this stuff." So it wasn't like, "What do you mean you're questioning the big book?" It's like,
Yeah.
So it was a good like dialogue going back and forth. And I think I opened up his mind a little bit too to things. But even with like the inventory, like I said to my wife, I'm doing that. Like she had me do these worksheets, and you check off selfish, self-seeking,
Yeah.
dishonest, and I go through them all. I'm like, I think I'm supposed to check all these off for each one. And I'm looking over this list, and I'm like, a lot of these are just like bad memories. These aren't really like horrendous things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to my wife, I'm like, do you think I'm selfish, self-seeking, self-centered, and dishonest? She's like, God, no, where are you getting this from?
Right.
I'm like, well, it's in the book. She's like, that's not you at all.
I know, isn't that funny?
Yeah. And
but the good thing that she was around, because otherwise you might have to believe it.
Yeah. And so I have validation that I am not all those
I wish I would have had someone like that, because I kind of took that on, that fuck, I'm a real selfish prick here.
Yeah. And even with like the expense accounting, like do you remember like the Columbia record house records and tapes? Like I remember
I do.
I joined up for my 11, and you got like the 11 records, and you got the thing in the mail, and I paid for them, because I thought you would go to jail if you didn't pay for them. Right. And then later on, I was talking to friends like later on, like, oh God, no, nobody pays for those things. I'm like, I was so intent, like you had to follow the law, and you'll go to jail, and like so I was never like a thief, and because people say like, remember when you were out there stealing, and I'm like, not my experience.
No.
Like I just blacked out. Like my experience is one of, now that I think back on it, it's one of maladaptive coping strategies. And that's all it was. And I just I blacked out a lot. I sent every text to some like brothers and sisters, but like I wasn't out there like doing all this crazy stuff. Not to say like other people didn't or do, but like that's just my story. And so I just had to learn new ways of coping.
Exactly.
And I was thinking, I heard John H's when I heard him talk the first time. When I heard him say how it works is this awful thing that gets read. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the only person who feels that way.
Yeah, it is awful too. It is awful. And there was actually, I think it was in the grapevine a few years ago, I remember seeing something where they questioned that. There was an open question: is it really wise to read this thing at the beginning of meetings? Could it possibly scare people away?
Yeah, I think it could. And
oh yeah, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Jesus. I mean, it's really it's weird. I, for years, would sit in meetings and listen to that. And okay, you have to kind of think of me where I was at that period of time. I kind of came in young. I was hanging around for a long time. And after a while, you just hear the words and you don't really think about them, And so it would be kind of like a mantra or something. I would just kind of go through the motions where I listened to it. It wasn't, and so it didn't bother me. It was almost kind of like relaxing for me just to sit here and listen to the crap, someone read it, right? But after I got to the point where I really realized I was an atheist, I could not stand hearing it anymore. Because then I'm really listening to it and what it's saying. And I found it not just objectionable, but offensive to me personally.
Absolutely. That's the other thing with the book. I can't reconcile being an atheist and the book. I remember someone, I was on a speaking commitment, and someone like another atheist, like I think we were at a detox or a IOP, and like we're going to start with how it works. And I'm like, how could you read that? You're an atheist. There's all this God stuff in it. And
I'm done with that too. And again, going back to my history, the first thing I did is when I kind of realized I was an atheist, I went to that big book and I tried to understand it and study it as an atheist. I have completely discarded it now. It just doesn't have a use. I don't have a use for that anymore. And I don't really even recommend it for anyone else.
Yeah, that's how I feel now. Because but one of my buddies from my home group's like, if someone asked you to sponsor them and take them through the 12 steps, could you do it? I'm like, actually, I don't know, because I can't sell it. So I don't know if I could do it.
I don't know either if I could either, to be honest with you. If someone wanted to do that, I guess I could refer them to some sort of a book, but I would just be honest with them. I say, I don't really think it's really necessary. We can just kind of talk within the context of whatever your experience is. I think it's better to speak in your own language. The problem with the steps is it's someone else's language.
Exactly. that's how I feel too. And some of the beings too. It almost feels like I feel sometimes people compromise their atheism. It's like, well, I had to find an interpretation of the third step prayer,
Hey, I
and
know, I
but you
know.
don't, you don't.
You
You could
don't.
just don't have to do it, or
You don't.
you know.
Yeah.
And it always kind of disheartens me a little. Like, I mean, it's my own personal feeling, but
And it's
I,
where people are too, I suppose, because it took me a while to evolve to where I'm at now, with the thought that I have about all this now. And so, we might be meeting people that are at a certain phase of their development where they think they need to have some sort of alternative higher power, but eventually they might get to the place where I arrived, where it's like, you know what, that word higher power isn't even in my vocabulary. It's not the way I talk. Um, I don't need a higher power. I got other people in my life that I kind of um, go to when I need
yeah,
help.
same here. Like, I reject higher power completely,
Yeah,
and
totally. But there
I
are
would,
people out there that said that, it could be atheists and say, you know what? My higher power is the universe. Well,
yeah, yeah,
that's fine. But maybe a year later they might say, you know what, that was bullshit.
yeah. Well, that's like, if you say it's like the doorknob, it's like, well, but if you put
Right.
doorknob in the higher power or God in the steps, it's
Or,
laughable,
or my higher
you know?
power is good, or my higher power is the group, or my higher power, blah blah
Yeah,
blah. You really don't even need one. I mean, the language itself is not something that normal people use in their everyday um, way of talking, right? I don't think so. Anyway, I never used to use that. I never used that word higher power until I got into AA.
yeah, me
Whoever
neither.
talks like that?
I think, it's funny, as I was thinking, I was jotting down like little notes and stuff, and I was trying to think, well, the steps don't really work for me, but like, what does really, what is my experience? And everyone's experience is different. Like, this is my experience. I just want to put the disclaimer that this is my experience. I'm not speaking for anybody else. Like, I'm just speaking for me. And I found, like, I had a moment of clarity. I ended up in a ER. Like, I didn't have this come to Jesus moment, and it was just like, I need to change. Otherwise, life's just going to get worse. And it kind of frustrates me when people are like, you just haven't hit rock bottom yet. And I want to
Um,
put the message out there, but you can get off the elevator at any time. Like,
yeah,
that's more of a message I like, because I don't think I went down to like the basement, or I felt like maybe I was like on the first floor, second floor. And I'm like, this seems like a really good spot to get off and go back up, you know? And I also realized, like, I had to have something for me. I had to have something of value to lose. I was like married, and things were pretty good in the marriage, but I was changing, and I recognized that I was changing. I was like hiding bottles in the house, and I was kind of being kind of, um, maybe not the most pleasant person to be around, And once that all kicked in, it's like, oh, what do I do? And I went to rehab and IOP, and I started seeing a therapist. I was seeing a therapist before, but she couldn't see me anymore. It just didn't work out, and I found a new therapist. And she believes in AA as a support group, but she's not a big 12-step proponent. So I'm like, oh, this will be perfect, because we were talking about the higher power, and she's like, I don't understand. Why aren't you the higher power? You're doing all the work.
yeah.
I'm like, all right, this is a perfect fit, you know. And through just had to like investigate like new ways of coping. And I think by going to meetings, and that part in the preamble where it's one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, in the meetings, you can like learn all these different coping strategies. And even in like the Living Sober book, that has like a lot of coping strategies that I like. And like, I really like Buddhist philosophy. I can't really say I'm a Buddhist because I don't believe in reincarnation.
Hmm.
But I like the Eightfold Path. Like, it doesn't
Hmm.
have all the God stuff. It's just right intention, so forth and so on. And I started practicing meditation. I like doing that. I had really good habits going. I wrote a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it was really great at establishing habits. But then I got hit by a car in November, um, and it kind of like upended like all the habits. So I'm kind of
This
working
last
on.
November?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was a little lady who hit me about like 20 miles per hour. I was in a crosswalk,
Oh,
and I was all right. I had to go to like the hospital and the ER and everything, but the doctor seemed like really annoyed. Like, I got all this like COVID stuff to deal with, and you're here hit by a car. Like, that's, she's like, you're fine. You can go now. Like, not a really good bedside manner.
it's funny you read that book. I had that book, and I don't think I finished it, or maybe I can't remember if I finished it or not. I don't think I did, but it was I got it because it was going to be the subject of a book club that I joined that I never really got involved in. Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I took it out of the library. It's one of the, I'm probably gonna buy it because it was really good for establishing habits. And
Mm-hmm.
I heard him on a podcast, I think with like Sam Harris or something, and I just really like James Clear, and
Mm-hmm.
I found it very helpful. So
Okay, I'll go back and
yeah,
read it.
and I think too, like in the steps they talk about like a spiritual awakening, and like that word is like not in my vocabulary. That's another one I just
Yeah.
reject outright. It doesn't really mean anything, and I really believe in science. And while I was hitting that like COVID burnout, I was watching like the great courses and reading like National Geographic, like the science of addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they talk about like the prefrontal cortex, the nucleus accumbens, and bonding neuroreceptors. And I'm like, well, you can't. How do you make that sexy? It's
I
like,
know. Yeah.
but because I go to meetings sometimes and people are like, oh, science doesn't explain recovery. I'm like, and
Uh,
I'm like, oh, kind of. Neuroscience is at a point where it kind of does,
it
you know,
does. Yeah.
and that should be encompassed, and it just seems to be rejected. And
Yeah.
and I don't know if maybe like the part of the steps too is like in the groups when you're working with in that group environment, that oxytocin, that bonding chemical gets released too, and it doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
matter. You're just like talking, you're working on something productive. Like I don't begrudge anyone who wants to do it. I
Sure.
just don't feel that it's for me.
Right.
But
No,
I just
no, I hear you. I'm the same way. I'm totally okay with the people who do it. I'm not going to put them down. It's just not for me where I'm at this point in my life. I'm not, it's not my thing. But I've been there before. I was one of those guys that thought it was real important. So I kind of get that, but I'm not there now.
Yeah, I guess just through like neuroplasticity, like the brain just like rewires itself. I went to, I go with my wife drinks, not heavily, just like, a bottle of wine a week or something
Mhm.
like that. And we went to the liquor store and I went with her, and she's also very into crafting. So I'll go with her, like, if she wants to go to the craft store to get yarn, and there's like nothing there for me. I'm like, oh, there's like no magazines to look at. And if there
Yeah.
are magazines, it's something like Yarn Today, and so I went to the liquor store the other day with her. I'm walking around looking. I'm like, oh, this is like the yarn store. There's like nothing
Right.
here for me.
It's
Like, well,
funny.
where's the soda?
Mhm.
And so I went
Mhm.
over to the little aisle where it's like soda, and it's like Coke, Diet Coke.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, like why don't they have like ginger ale and
Mhm.
Dr. Pepper Zero and you know? So I'm like, can we go now? I want to go home and read a magazine or do something else. But like, I just think, in my mind, I've established like I'm a person who doesn't drink, or I don't
Yeah.
drink when problems arise. Not to say I don't handle all problems well,
Right.
because I'm human and imperfect. And I think that's just, it's okay to be imperfect instead of like concentrating on character defects and all these
Yeah.
things. It's just, hey, I'm imperfect and I got some stuff to work on and to be
Yeah.
a decent person.
Yeah. So are you finding that the even the secular meetings that you're going to, are they kind of are you beginning to kind of question about, how useful they are for you, or is it something about them that's just not doing it for you for right now?
I think so. I think part of it's maybe that like advocacy for the steps that keeps popping up. And
Yeah.
when John H had mentioned, when he talks about a separate secular
Yeah.
thing, at first I was kind of like, I don't know, I don't know if that would work. And I still don't, but like, well, I'm more like, well, maybe it would work. I just don't,
Hmm.
because then you wouldn't be beholden to the steps in the book, and you could have like your own literature and that kind of thing. I just don't know how it would work. Like, I don't know, like, when you get into like structures of organizations, and like, I wouldn't want to be involved with general service committees and, all
Yeah.
those things. I just don't know what it would, I'm not opposed to it. And now I'm of the mind maybe it's a good idea. And,
Yeah.
I would definitely, if I would,
Was your home group, I mean, when you were meeting in person, was it like that though too? Were they wanting to were there See, my home group, and I haven't been going to meetings, but we're meeting in person now again, and I haven't been back. But when I was going to meetings regularly at that group, they didn't really talk about steps. They didn't really talk about that kind of stuff so much. The meetings were usually kind of a topic meeting about whatever. a lot of times it wouldn't even be anything that we read. Someone would just come up with a topic and then we would talk about it. But you wouldn't really see anything about the steps. And then every once in a while somebody would kind of complain. They say, "We never talk about the steps here, or we don't have sponsors and we don't do this or that." And then people would try to fit into that mold and it would just never work. And we just kind of just go back to, getting together and talking about a topic and then hanging out afterwards. But was your group, your face-to-face group, was it actually kind of more into the mold of wanting to read something that having to do with steps and so forth?
Um, the agnostic group we started, it wasn't so much like reading stuff. It would just be people would be like, if you're not working, some people would be like, you have to be working the steps to be sober, and it
Yeah,
would
yeah,
come up, and some would just be like topics, and sometimes you just like struggle for a topic. It's
right,
like, what do you want to talk about? It's like, how many times can you talk about?
right,
If you hang out at the barber shop, you'll get a haircut. Like,
right,
well, I want
right,
a haircut.
right.
um,
So I was wondering if that maybe that was a Zoom phenomena that you started, because I know our group, when we started meeting online, people from around the country would come to that meeting. So it was just no longer just the group of people that would get together here physically, but it was people from around the world and around the country that would get together. And I'm wondering if that kind of changed the flavor of the meeting a little bit for your group.
yeah, I thought I was going to go to like so many, like I can go to all the agnostic and secular meetings now, and then that burnout just hit, and I just kind of like, I did
It's
a
like,
few.
yeah,
I think I've been to yours a couple times, or the one you go to a couple
really.
times,
And
and
you've
like,
probably been there more than I have.
yeah,
I burned out a long time ago on them.
yeah, that was about like right at the beginning. I think
Yes.
now maybe I go to like the meeting, the agnostic meeting we do like two times a month, if that. So
Yeah. the podcast has been pretty much my meeting, and I'm
yeah,
still kind of connected with people online, in the community and so forth. But yeah, the Zoom meetings I got burned out on pretty quickly. And I've explained this before, and maybe it's an excuse, I don't know, but here's the deal. I'm sitting at this desk where I'm at physically right now, 8 hours of my day at work now, okay? And I am talking to people I work with on the screen. All my interactions with all human beings are on this screen. And then when my workday is done, I can shut down my computer for a little bit and walk away, and then I can turn it back on. And I'm going to go to a meeting, an AA meeting, where all my interactions are with these people on the screen, just like I had done all day long at work. And I'm physically tired of looking at people on the screen. So it got to a point where it's like 6 o'clock at night or whatever. It's time for the meeting. And I didn't have it in me to want to log on to another damn meeting and see people on a screen. It just, to me, it was like an extension of what I've been doing all day anyway at work. I wasn't getting that connection with people that I would get um when I would go to the meeting. So it's kind of weird. Like, it seems like when I would, because I worked at home anyway for a while, but I could shut down, get in my car, drive somewhere, and you'd have like a little bit of a break, go see some people, have some laughs or whatever, and come back. And it was a different experience than just kind of sitting here.
yeah, that was one of my favorite parts about going to a physical meeting, whether it's like the 6:30 a.m. home group I go to or the 7 o'clock agnostic meeting that we have. And I think too with Zoom, it's like you can see in my, hey, here's my house. Like, other
Yeah.
people can see where I live. Like you can see
Right.
like Mr. T back there and Willie Nelson that my wife made,
Right.
that she crocheted. That's what she's been doing to ease her stress level. And but the other thing too is like, this is a one-bedroom apartment. So, my wife is behind the door over there, and I know she's not listening, but if
Oh,
I just
yeah.
don't feel as free to share
Right.
something
Right. So
here
it's
at
private.
home. And we have the two cats. And so if I shut the door, they're gonna like scratch at the door. So like half
Right.
the time I'll be like focusing on the cats, and I've got to go open the door or what's going on. I'm not really paying attention. And it's hard to with like Zoom, like you have someone's like boring you to death, as happens in any meeting.
Right.
You can just Zoom on like Amazon or
Right.
whatever and
Exactly.
just do something else.
Yeah.
And it's easier not to focus on what's going on. And I
And I
just
shouldn't
miss.
say this just in case somebody from work might discover this YouTube channel and see me. But when they have meetings at work sometimes where I don't have to do anything, so what I'll do is I'll listen to the meeting. I'll turn the speakers on and I'll sit in a comfy chair somewhere while the meeting goes on. And it's always like the CFO talking about how great we're doing or whatever. And I'll just go start fall asleep.
Yeah.
It's like I could never really do that when we had to actually have the meeting in person. We had to force yourself to stay awake, while the guy is droning on about, and our bottom line numbers are.
So we're getting our synergies together to leverage our product.
But fortunately, nobody from work will ever see this podcast.
But that's it. It just feels like another thing, like in my house, and I like things to be like outside of the house. Like I like that, like separate. I'm a big compartmentalizer. I always have been, and I just like the meetings to be separate. And it was just good having. It was like a break from home. Like if we get along very well, but like let's say we have something stressful between us, like I can go to a meeting and just hang out for a little bit, maybe talk to someone, feel a little de-stressed when I come home. Whereas it's like here, it's like, oh, can you go in the bedroom? I gotta put on the headphones, or
But it's weird though too. So now, this COVID thing is so weird though, because so for a while things were getting better here. Most of us that were going to the meetings, we were all vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. Most people in my life are vaccinated, so we could go out, and it was almost like returning to normal again, But now here in Missouri, it's really bad. Most of the people in Missouri, and I don't know if I guess most have not been vaccinated, and it's really bad. So now people have to wear masks again. But even with all that, even when things were good, it was difficult for me to start going to those physical meetings again for whatever reason. It's like I've kind of gotten used to being, even though I can complain about it, I'm by nature one who kind of likes to kind of not being around people anyway.
Yes.
It's really weird, but I like being around people, but it's like, it's effort,
Yeah.
And when I make the effort, it's good. And I think it's probably good for me. It's healthy for me, but I have to really force myself to do it. And this COVID thing kind of gave me a reason not to need to make that effort. It's just really weird. I don't know how to explain it, but other people are going to the meetings, and I know if I went to that meeting and saw them, I would be happy to see them and it would be fun and everything. But for some reason, it's hard for me to break from what I'm doing now and doing that, because I feel like, well, partly is I'm pretty busy. Like I'm talking to you right now, right? We're talking about the program. I do this a lot. And so this is kind of like my recovery program now, this podcast. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Same thing. It's like, I don't like people, yet I like being around them, like at a meeting or even like hiking. Like there's people like nearby, but I don't have to be with them.
Right.
What was I going to say? I forgot.
So I went outside today. I don't know why. It's really hot. It's really hot here. It's been miserable here, and it's probably like that everywhere right now. But it's really hot here, and I kind of was joking with my wife. I went outside. And I came back in. I said, "Hey, sweetie, I went outside and I interacted with another person." And she said, "Oh, really? How'd that go?" I thought it would be nice to go outside, and there was a person there, and I said hello.
It's amazing. Like that's like, with the COVID, like the home group, the group that I started, I consider my home group. That it's at 6:30 in the morning, and I got text that we're doing it in person, and you have to wear a mask, which is fine. It's like the church's rule.
You do have to wear?
Yeah, okay. But
I think they have to now here now too.
Yeah, that's the church's rule. But even now, like in New Jersey, they're like, you should wear it when you go out. Like I had to get like a spinal injection the other day, and I said to the doctor, I'm like, what's the deal with masks? Should I wear one or not? I don't really know with everything that's going on. He's like, if you care about the public good and you don't want to transmit the Delta variant or new variants to anyone, wear the mask when you go out. So I'm like, good enough for me.
Yeah.
But with our Thursday group, one of the things I don't know what's going to happen is there's a new guy in charge. We meet at a Quaker Meeting House, and
I remember that.
Called me up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm the new guy, and do you guys have proof of insurance?" I'm like, "We didn't need it for the other person." So there's like that, and then he's
Do you
like, you
have to
might.
have that?
I whenever when I was investigating places, if people asked and I said no, they wouldn't call back. And then other places were just the Quaker Meeting House was like, no, and they never brought it up. So we're just like, all right, here's the place.
I just assumed that the wherever you rent from is the one that has the insurance.
Yeah, that's what I figured as well. And
Uh,
then he was also talking like they're open in a limited capacity, and he had said like, well, we'd also have to determine if we're going to ask if people are vaccinated or not to come here.
hmm,
And like, I don't want to be the vaccination police.
no,
I'm pro-vaccine, but I don't want
right?
to be a
No,
vaccine cop. And he's like,
no.
well, what I have to do is we have to go to our trustees and talk about it, blah blah blah. So I had to tell him, all right, you have to do that, and then I have to bring it back to our group and tell them what you think. So I don't know if our group's gonna what's gonna happen with our group, if it's gonna be in person or in Zoom or a hybrid. But I really don't like the hybrid meeting.
No,
It's just like corporate America again.
yeah,
You know?
I know. The hybrids don't work too well, from what I hear from the people from my group because it's kind of a distraction. It's a bit of a distraction.
That's what I felt. The one and only hybrid meeting I've been to, I was sitting there, and then you have the person leading the meeting, and then you have the person over there doing all the tech stuff. And our Quaker, the meeting at the Quaker Meeting House, there's roughly about 12 of us, and I'm not technological at all. Like, my wife fixes everything.
Hmm.
And so if it came down to it, like the person in charge of the laptop has to be there or whatever, or the Wi-Fi.
Right,
So I don't
right.
really know. I think if we do go back in person, they'll probably just try it out and see how it goes, which is fine. Um, I'm not opposed to that, but I don't really like the hybrid meeting. But
No,
yeah, if that's what the group consensus is, I'm fine with that.
no. Well, it'll be interesting to see how things go here, and if I will, I'm in a state of change right now for myself personally, and I can feel that. I don't know, I don't go to the meetings now, and will I ever go back? I don't know. I still have friends there. I'd like to see them. Maybe I will some. I don't know, but where I'm at right now, I'm still kind of like this online mode where it's the podcast keeps me busy, keeps me into thinking about my recovery. I'm somewhat involved with the peer support community in Missouri, which I like. So I'm still kind of involved in things recovery related, but not necessarily AA related. Um,
I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm like, is our meeting still for me? Like,
yeah,
because I've talked to some people and they're like, oh, you haven't like gone to a meeting. I'm worried about you. And I'm like, "Well,
yeah,
I noticed as I had stopped going to meetings, like I don't really think about drinking and alcohol.
no,
And I know there's that component of like helping others. So if you don't go to a meeting, you're not helping anyone. But at the same time, I'm like, but my mental health is in a good spot as well by
yeah.
not going to meetings. So
I know that I'm kind of coming to that conclusion. I'm like, I like the damn people. I mean, I have friends there, and I've known these people for a while now. I mean, our group has been meeting for 7 years, and a lot of the people that go to that meeting have been going there for that time. So I do like the people, but I don't. It's not. It's not necessary for me for my sobriety, my recovery, for my personal growth. It's not necessary for me to have that for my personal growth and sobriety and all that kind of stuff anymore.
yeah, that's how I feel too. It's just the people. Like there's like some
The
people I
people
really
is
want to see.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I went to the meet, I texted another guy who went in and like, hey, like Starbucks, and it's like, sure. Like, how did you like the hybrid meeting? It's like, oh, I hated it. I like this part, the part where we're having
Yeah.
coffee afterwards. So,
Right.
and the kitchen there is closed. This is the 6:30 in the morning group I go to. The kitchen's like you can't have coffee in the kitchen, so there's no one really like hanging out and talking. It's just like you go into the meeting room, and then when it's over, you leave. So
Yeah.
and one of my friends is like moving, and he's very supportive of what we're doing. Because we were talking in the parking lot one day, he's like, oh, I was at home and I was like praying the other day. He's like, don't worry, I know you don't do that. I'm like, it's okay, but it's nice when people support you. I'm like, oh, there's someone who supports us that's like not going to be here.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't like when you go to the hybrid meeting, like, and you're sitting there in the room, like you're not really going to make a connection with someone on
No.
the Brady Bunch screen up there.
No.
Like who's like Jack F from Saskatchewan,
Right.
like,
Right.
and they're not going to be like, oh, who's that Joe K guy who said blah blah blah. So
But I have the sense that maybe you're kind of in the same kind of place that I'm in, where you're kind of recognizing that, you know, that your view or your experience has changed from a year ago or 2 years ago, like mine has. I mean, I'm just in a state where I don't know what my relationship with AA is anymore and what it's going to be going forward. I just know what I'm doing now and how things are going now. But it has changed a lot. It's not it's not as essential to me. Even the some of the political stuff in AA, like a few years ago, I was like really involved with AA service. I went to the area assembly, and I was going to all that business kind of stuff, and was really kind of involved in it. And I was also wanting I guess to be more involved with like somehow changing AA or helping to be part of a transformation within AA to help secularize it or whatever. I'm totally not interested in any of that anymore.
I felt the same way. Like right before COVID, we were talking about at there's a convention here in New Jersey in Somerset, like in July, I think in the summer, and we were talking about, oh, maybe we can get like a table, or
Right.
we can get
And
agnostic
I used to
meetings
be into all
going.
that stuff.
And I was like really into that. And then like, like COVID happened, and like I feel the same way. Like there's been yeah, I think there's been a growth in secular recovery with all there's so many meetings now that anyone can go to. Like it's almost not necessary to do all that.
I know. And in another weird way, now again, I'm not going to meetings. I don't know, but in the early days when I was going to the Zoom meetings, if I went to a traditional meeting, like for example, I went to some area assembly meetings and stuff like that early on under COVID when we were online. And something that I found really funny was that these groups who used to always do the Serenity Prayer at the beginning and the Lord's Prayer at the end, they stopped doing it on Zoom because it just wasn't practical.
Yeah.
You couldn't really do it in unison, you couldn't really say the prayer stuff. And so it was like it's almost like Zoom was kind of secularizing meetings that used to not be so secular. I don't know. Do you think that's happened
Yeah.
a little bit?
I need to go to more Zoom meetings to
To know?
to know. Yeah,
I just kind of wonder, and like the last Zoom meeting I went to was one I spoke at, and that was a very liberal group in San Francisco, and it seemed like totally secular. I don't know. It kind of depends probably what group you're going to. I
yeah,
should probably get on Zoom and go like to some Alabama group or something.
yeah, I should too.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because I did find in this area, like when we started the secular meeting, there was like no pushback. I pictured like a lot of pushback, and I think I mentioned this when I was on the podcast before. That the only question was like, did you check with other AA groups about there being like a time overlap issue? And then everyone just voted yes. So
Hmm.
and most people seemed like generally supportive of the meeting, and that was pretty good. So I just expected, I don't know if like times are changing, and they're
Hmm.
in the country, like there are more secular people too as well. So I don't
Yeah.
think that has anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was thinking about this steps again for a second, and I was going in the city to, prior to COVID, they
Oh
had like
yeah.
secular step meetings. And let me like check that out. I was going to the beginning, and there were not a lot of people there. Like
Oh really?
there'd only be like 3 or 4 people, and then they would like, someone would read the step, you talk about it, and the meeting was over in about like 17 minutes, and then
Yeah.
everyone just left. And so I was just like, oh, I guess maybe like I thought there would be more people trying, because this is at the time when I was trying to like I have to shoehorn this in before I'm
Right.
like I realized, oh, I just don't have to do it. Like I could just
Right.
do what works for me, and I came to
Right.
that realization. And then I was also just thinking too about like the narrative, also about like the director in the book.
Yeah.
Like everyone wants to be in control. I'm like, that was so not me. Like, because every job I've ever had, it's always been like, hey, you're responsible. Take on the do this, or can you do this? I'm like, oh, I want to be out of control. I do not want to be in control. I want to be like under the radar. And like, so this whole narrative just didn't really fit and resonate with me. And if you say that in a traditional meeting, it's like, oh, what do you mean? It's the book.
I
And I
know.
haven't really started, I've been starting to put it out there in the agnostic meetings that I'm not a step person, because even I feel too, this is just my own feeling. I don't know if it's like a fear that there's going to be a pushback, like, you can't say anything negative about
Mhm.
the steps. but if no one says like this is my experience or I do things differently, like the message doesn't get out there. And I guess I think, oh, if I don't go to meetings, that message doesn't get out there. But
That's kind of true.
mm,
I talk about this sometimes. So when I was first getting introduced to this whole idea of being an atheist in AA, so I came again from this background where I was like pretty traditional. I was an atheist, but I still thought the big book was good and important. I thought the steps were important, and I just thought that that was just being an AA. That these are the things that you did. And the first time I ever heard somebody say anything critical of the steps, and they were not just, it was not just, it wasn't nice critical. It was like they trashed the steps. I'm like, what the, what? What did you just do? I can't believe you said that. I was like in a state of shock. I mean, why are you even in AA? But it helped me to hear that. And then I started hearing more and more and more. And, so that when I finally got to the place where I was kind of questioning, just how important they are to me, I think that probably did help me. And John Huey is my friend, and we talk a lot. He hates the steps.
yeah,
I mean, he can't stand them. But I can sit here and listen to him now, and it doesn't shock me for when he talks like that. I think it's fine that he's that way. I don't know. I have some disagreements with him on just the way he delivers his message. But
yeah,
but I kind of, it's so weird. I agree with what he says. It's just sometimes how he says it is kind of troublesome for me in some way. I don't know.
yeah. I think he might have been like the first like I heard where he like I think his podcast on the relevancy of the steps was like, oh, someone thinks that, and
Yeah.
then he's very intensely uh, about it. And I think I forwarded to a friend of mine, and it's like, that's pretty extreme. I'm like, but like
I guess when I guess the thing when I'm talking to him, he uses we a lot. He says
yeah,
we need to do this. We need to break out on our own. We need to leave AA, blah blah. And I always have to stop and say, who is we? And he does define that as atheist. So he does believe that atheists in general, even those who might be happy in AA, he thinks that they're kind of they haven't broken free yet, and they need to be kind of pushed. I think is
yeah,
his view on that. Whereas I'm like, just live and let live. Let people kind of find their own way. I don't give a shit if they do steps or don't do steps. Just don't tell me what I need to do.
yeah, exactly. That's how I feel. But then I guess part of me wants to. There is when people start talking about the steps at meetings, I'm like, you don't have to do it. But
Yeah.
then I'm that guy telling someone what they should do. So I just kind of bite my tongue. I'm like, all right, well, I don't need to do them, but I don't need to tell someone else what
Right.
they need to do, even though I kind of want to.
Yeah. And in a way too, there is a danger in them going back to this. Like you will find someone who, for whatever reason, they feel like it's important that they put themselves out there that to be a sponsor for someone. They'll go, I will be your sponsor. You listen to me and you do these things. And I hate that, but that there's that personality out there. And when you're at that point in your life where you're first realizing that, man, my life is fucked up, I really need to stop drinking, I got a lot of problems, you're in a pretty vulnerable state. And these people who come to you and say, I will be your sponsor and I will do these things with you, you just do these things. I mean, you're really in you're in a place where that it's easy to fall and start doing whatever crap that person is saying you should do. And it might be good to have someone else in the meeting say, wait a second, that guy might think that, but I've been sober for 30 years and I kind of realize you don't really need to mess with that so much.
Yeah,
Because I see that, I do see that sometimes. I see these people even in secular meetings, kind of put themselves out there as saying, and I think they have good intentions. They say, hey, hey, I can help you with this. I've done this. It's very helpful. But I don't know. I think that it's more important that they speak just from their own experience and let other people. I just think people need to find their own path. I think people need to find their own way. And I think the best thing that we can do to help somebody is allow them to find their own way.
Yeah, that's the
I really do.
I think that's the message, if anything, I'd like to put out there, that it's okay to find your own way. If you
I
want to do
think it's
this,
essential.
like if you want to do the steps and that's your way, that's fine. But if you don't want to do the steps and you don't think that'll work for you, and you need to find another way, that's
Absolutely.
also fine. You know?
It's absolutely, I think it's really important. And if there's anything that I regret from my past experience, even though I stayed sober, if there's anything I do regret, it's that I was such a conformist that I did that.
Yeah, in fact, that's how I feel now. Like I'm like I kind of regret doing these. Like I felt like I was like trying to pigeon my hole into something I wasn't, and I kind of wish
Yeah.
I didn't. But you don't know until later.
You don't,
So
and again, looking back at myself at that time, I was having a good time. I was okay. I was sober. Life was getting better. I had friends, and when I wasn't in meetings, I'd hang out with my friends. We weren't talking about steps or whatever. But I did, in the confines of the meetings, conform to the narrative that you were talking about, that, oh, I'm a self-centered, egotistical power driver.
yeah,
know?
like that's one person's narrative. That there were a group of
I
people.
know. But I do wish I had someone like your wife who said, "That's not you.
Yeah,
You're not really that."
I love having independent validation. So, because
I
I
didn't
do
have
it.
that. Everybody I had in my life at the time was saying, "Yep, you're so."
Yeah, yeah, that's you, buddy. Wait, I don't want to be that. Yeah, I think too. I like when you have guests like Jon Stewart on. I always thought it
Yeah,
was going to be the guy from TV, but just like people that have left AA, that they've stayed sober, because people. You have a couple of friends that say they couldn't do Zoom and they haven't gone to meetings and they're sober. They're just like, oh,
yeah,
you know what? I know what to do. Like, I know who to contact, and, and I'm fine. But sometimes if I've talked to people, it's like, oh, I'm a little worried about you. You haven't gone to a meeting, and I'm like, but if
I
you,
wonder about that. Are they really worried?
yeah, but if you keep repeating that, then it's almost like a self-fulfilling thing. Like it's okay if I don't go to a meeting. Like for me, it's okay. But when people say like, if I noticed, like one of my frustrations with AA was like there's a lot of if you don't, like if you
Right.
don't, and that just gets repeated. And I also want to put like a message of empowerment out there, because I was thinking about like the first step almost. Meaning people keep going like I'm powerless over everything, and I'm like, oh, but that's not necessarily true. I by taking action and addressing your drinking problem, like aren't you like empowering yourself to do something? Like I'm
Right.
empowering myself to find ways and to find support, not to drink. And part of that is building. I think too is a social sobriety safety net. Like you have people you can contact, and I just feel like the steps have this disempowering language, especially step three, because I don't believe in a higher power, and then so I'm not going to turn my will over to
Right.
a higher power. And I don't believe in turning my will over to anything. Like I need
Right.
to make my own decisions, and that frustrates me. And I just want to also put out like a message of empowerment. Like I'm empowered by my choices, and I think for me that works much better than like I'm selfish. And even like
Yeah.
in the 12 and 12, there's like that whole thing about like the seven deadly sins, and it's like, well, if we're not religious, and why do you have the seven deadly
Yeah.
sins? And
I have no use
yeah,
for any of that
yeah,
literature.
I don't either.
But in one way though, there's probably no better time to get into recovery than right now anyway, because there are more options available, and there's all kinds of smaller groups that have just kind of sprung up just naturally out of the internet, just like, yeah, gosh, people I've talked to, like the soberest book club, just all that is a group of people to get together and read books about recovery, and some of them not even necessarily recovery related, and they are staying sober. Then there's the group of people who are restaurant workers and bar workers who get together. They don't have any kind of a formal program or anything, but they all have that in common, that they happen to work in restaurants, and it's a bit challenging to get sober when you're working in a bar or a restaurant. It's a tough
Yeah,
environment. and there's all kinds of groups like that. There's just all kinds of groups just, forming up on social media and so forth that aren't related to any kind of formal program, but they are communities. They are sober communities, and a lot of these that I'm seeing come about. What mode of support network you use is unimportant, and sometimes or whatever it's just, I guess, they're a lot less dogmatic than the world that I lived in when I was introduced to recovery back some time ago. It's just a bit broader and roomier now than I've ever seen it. So in some respect, it's a lot better. It's a good time if you can find these communities. They're not maybe always so easy to find, but anybody who lives on the internet long enough will eventually find them, I think.
Yeah, I saw like in my Facebook feed there was a thing for like a sober book club. I think it was like Sundays at 8. And I kind of like that idea of reading different
Yeah,
literature. There's so much. I mean, the big book's like almost 100 years old now,
I
and
know. Yeah, I
there's
like that. That's good. And she I love that podcast I did with her, Susie Darren. She
uh,
when she started that book club, she got some criticism because people says, "Oh, you can't stay sober just from reading books." And she said, "Well, it's not just me reading books. It's me reading books and having and inviting other people to talk about the books with me." And she says it's that community that I'm building around the books that's helping me. It's not just reading the book. Although,
um,
it might be just reading book might be enough anyway. But she
yeah,
but she just made the point that for her, what it really is that community and connection that she's having with other people around the books.
yeah. It like it goes back to that quote: "The opposite of addiction is connection."
Connection.
And I have to. I didn't hear her on the podcast. I'll have to check that out.
It was pretty good. I liked her, and that's the book club that I joined and never have really gotten involved with. I need to just make time to do that.
Yeah, I
The
saw there were.
podcast keeps me incredibly busy.
Yeah, the podcast helped me like tremendously because I used to drive around before COVID. I was like driving around a lot, and I could listen to it and just hearing like people's stories and different
Yeah,
perspectives. Like I found it like engaging. Like I need to be driving or doing something to hear a podcast. Normally, like I can't just be sitting like still. So when I'm walking or driving is usually the best time for me to listen to them. But when I was out and about, like I could listen to, and I got a lot out of the podcast, just hearing the different stories.
yeah, and just doing them for me too. It's been transformative for me personally, and I'm noticing as I'm looking at the types of episodes that I'm doing now, and they're different than the episodes that I had done in the beginning. Where in the beginning I had a lot more personal stories. I still have some of those now, but now the subject matter is a little bit different. I'm talking to people who are talking about like different things like self-esteem or I don't know, just different kind of issues now. And then I've got coming up an author I'm going to talk to about. Oh yeah, here's the book. I haven't started this yet, but it's called "Treating Trauma and Addiction with the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model, a
That's
Bottom Up
a
Approach."
that's a mouthful.
I can't even pronounce the title, but I'm looking forward to it. And she seems very nice. She teaches at the University of Toronto, and it's kind of about trauma. I guess it is about trauma and how that impacts people, having addiction problems and so forth. I don't know. I'm kind of looking forward to reading it. I'm just kind of learning more and more about trauma and how that relates to recovery. But this is the kind of stuff now. This is where my recovery is going, and this is where I'm getting from the podcast. And it's just kind of taking me in a different direction than where I was, a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah, I found speaking of books, there was one by Kristen Neff. She has a book on self-compassion, and I
Oh,
won't do it justice to describe it, but she talks about self-compassion versus self-esteem. And
mm,
I found it. Someone posted it on a recovery blog, and I read it, and it was like really helpful. And she has a new book out. It's like Fierce Self-Compassion for Women, but I think it's just applicable to everybody.
yeah,
Like that's her newest book, but the book prior to that was Self Compassion. It was just about having compassion for yourself. mindfulness, and if basically accepting that you're imperfect and that's
Mm,
okay. And
yeah.
I just found that, like that book and the James Clear Atomic Habit books, those
I'm
books
gonna go
are,
back to that. I'm gonna go back
yeah,
to and read that again.
I
I
just
think
found, oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
I think that's I'm glad that you mentioned that book though, because it reminded me, yeah, that's on my Kindle, and I either read it and forgot I read it, or I haven't read it. I
Yeah.
started reading it and stopped. I can't
What's the,
remember.
yeah, I think I did too, just with like reading. I hit I was reading a lot of recovery books, and I just hit like recovery burnout. So now I
Yeah,
feel up to like reading other things now, like the book with the mouthful title. I'll have to.
yeah, yeah. Well, Joe, I enjoyed this. It was fun. It was nice seeing you again. It's nice
Yeah, you
catching
too.
up and see how things are going. I kind of think that I think we're kind of in a similar spot. I think we're both fine and okay.
Yeah, and that's
I don't
good.
know if we covered all the topics that you wanted to really talk about, but I enjoyed what we talked about, and I think other people will too. I think that you
Hope so.
know what we're talking about is something of interest to a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people right now who are just in the secular recovery world, secular AA world, or not, that are just like questioning, like, wow, man, do I really need this? Do I really need this stuff from 80 years ago or whatever? Or can't I just talk my own way? I don't know.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Just you can find your own path and empowerment. I guess those are the two things.
Yeah. And it's not like we're
Yeah,
putting anybody down or anything.
no, not at all.
Not at all. John does that. John Huey does that. And that's it. That's another episode of Beyond Belief Sobriety. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to support our podcast, there's a couple different ways you can do that. First of all, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. You can go to our website, beyondbeliefsobriety.com, and click on the donate button. You can become a patron at patreon.com/beyondbeliefsobriety. And anything you can do would be appreciated. Do thank you. And thank you, Joe. It was wonderful
Thanks,
talking
John.
to you. I really did enjoy this.
You too. Thank you.
Mhm.